Okay, hi. Um, if those of you who just joined us, we have the, oh, I got to be up here, huh? For those of you who just joined us, we were talking about the TSA. Of course, I wore my I Heart Snowden shirt today. Um, Snowden has done one in the whole, because I sell open source software that does network management. We actually get a lot of business because of the Snowden revelations, because overseas, they don't want to trust commercial software anymore. So I'm like, yay, go man. But I do wear this to the airport. I do wear it. But unfortunately for the TSA, they don't really get it, except one guy did give me the stink eye. It's kind of funny. Because I'm pre-check. I'm like, you can't do anything. I'm just going to get right through. Anyway, my name's Tarus Balog. I maintain a project called OpenNMS. Has anyone ever heard of OpenNMS? Does anyone actually use OpenNMS? Yay! Yay! We got one user. The folks here itself, which is, by the way, one of my favorite conferences, have let us. We're going to hook it up to the network. So if you come by our booth this weekend, we're going to be monitoring the self network using OpenMS, so we can kind of show you what it looks like. So I've been doing open source professionally since 2002. I didn't start the OpenMS project. Some people I know did, but they were VC backed. And in that kind of business plan, VCs sometimes, they want you to spend all the money really fast. And then when you run out of money, they'll make a decision whether or not to fund you again. And that they didn't get that decision, so they decided not to do any more work on OpenMS. And so I took over the project. That was the easy part, convincing them to give me the project, convincing my wife I had done the right decision, quit my job and, what are you going to do, honey? I'm going to sell free software. And how many of you are married? So yeah, I was informed that if you are the sole breadwinner at the time and you quit your job, that this is a we decision and not just a me decision. So anyway, we're still together, 22 years. So I guess that's great. Let you know a little secret. If you want to get a paper accepted, have a really controversial title like "Open Source is Dead." As you know, open source isn't dead. I was talking to someone the other day, and they told me that 90% of the devices we'd call computers, if you count phones, cars, set-top boxes, computers, run Linux, BSD, or some form of that. So, open source is definitely alive and well. What this talk is about is kind of how open source has changed over the years. And when I say years, this is me in my high school yearbook. So this picture is circa like 1982, and that is my TRS-80 Model 1. I don't know if any of you or some of you are obviously got gray hair like me, so you know that you might have heard of this. This is honestly the only surviving picture of my TRS-80 is these two pictures taken out of my yearbook, and they scan kind of funny. And back then, computers were such a new concept. Now everyone has them. I mean, you're born and you get the baby bottle, the little pacifier, and an iPad. But then they didn't know what to think. And so they heard I had a computer, so the yearbook lady and a photographer came to my house, and they took a couple of pictures of me sitting in my little bedroom. And I can remember, all I was thinking about, there's a girl in my room. Because it didn't happen very often. Again, I had a computer in 1982, but they didn't know. They didn't know. So how would you caption this? And I'm not kidding you. This is the caption that they put on the yearbook here. Catching the latest computer news. Turns out nothing phony about. That's and they misspelled my name. But anyway, so this is how when I started with computers, I'd lived in Asheboro, North Carolina. It's a tiny little town. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have bulletin board systems. What we had were magazines. And so I would get every month. And what's so funny is I really wish I'd kept mine, because there are almost no pictures of creative computing and kilobaud microcomputing on the internet. These were like the best two I could find. I used to get, these were the two that I mainly got, and they would have program listings in them. And I learned to type by typing 10, print, hello, 20, go to, is basic. And so if you think about it, back then, all software was open source. I mean, we didn't have this idea. I mean, we ended up having, I used to get this C-load magazine, because cassette load was the command for getting information. And so they'd get a game or something. And almost all those were written in BASIC. There were a few machine code that were a little harder to deal with. But for the most part, all all this stuff was open source. This, and I can't even find a picture that's not for the TRS-80. This is for the Apple II. This was the first piece of commercial software I bought. I paid $19.95 for a copy of Microsoft's Colossal Cave Adventure for the TRS-80. And again, Microsoft being Microsoft, they screwed with the format of the floppy disk because they didn't want anyone to be able to duplicate it. So it would, kind of load its own little driver and then kind of messes up. And then they basically lifted it from CPM. I mean, Colossal Cave Adventure has been around for a really long time. But, it's just, I thought it was kind of ironic that the first piece of software I ever bought was from Microsoft. And that was, that was the first piece of commercial software. Prior to that, for 2 years or so, all the software I got, I ended up having to type in, which was really upsetting when you were typing in an adventure game because you had to kind of like try to forget the text you were typing in or else you'd ruin the game. Or you'd be in the middle of something and you get a syntax error, like because you screwed something up and it's, oh crap, I got to do it again. So I brought this up. This actually happened a little bit before. I got my computer in December of 1978, and so this happened a little bit before. But most people have probably heard of this. This is Bill Gates' infamous letter to hobbyists. Where he kind of threw down the gauntlet. He says, hey, you hobby people don't support us because most of you steal your software anyway. You just steal software. And because to us, as a hobbyist, there was an older guy down the street who also he had a TRS-80 Model 3. Oh, Model 3. It was all in one. Mine had little boxes, and we'd share. I'd share magazines if I typed in code. It was this kind of proto open source community. But Bill kind of put the kibosh on that. He said, "Okay, you're stealing software." And what did it get him? Well, they had an IPO. And so this is the IPO, which I think is funny because at the time Microsoft was they were doing 175 million a year and we're behind Lotus, which is kind of you're thinking about Microsoft at the time. At one point in time was one of the most valuable companies on the planet, and when they IPO'd, it was here. But so there was real money to be made in software, so people started hoarding that. And so this idea of open source started to fade. Now people wanted you to buy software. And so getting, and software also, to be quite honest, became much more complex, that typing in stuff was probably a little bit more of a hassle than normal. Then this guy came along. I assume everyone recognizes Eric S. Raymond. No, I'm sorry. This is, of course, RMS, Richard Stallman. He came in and he said, no, this is wrong. We need to be able to see the code and we need to be able to do this. So he introduced this idea of free software. And we've all probably seen the 4 freedoms. The freedom to run a program for anything you wish, the freedom to study how the program works, and then the best one here is the freedom to redistribute it so you can help your neighbor. When's the last time you saw in a licensing or any kind of concept this idea of helping your neighbor? So you know what we're talking about here, don't you? Openistas! Viva la revolución! It's communism! Come on, we're America. We're going to sell software. What is this free software stuff? No one could possibly make money selling free software. I dug this up on archive.org. This is the first copy of Red Hat's webpage. And I'm just going to lay it out there. I have a huge man crush on Jim Whitehurst. I think Jim Whitehurst is one of the greatest guys on the planet. He's actually talked to me, like I said, hey, can I have some of your time? And he said, sure. And I got to go and sit in his big office and look at his red shoes. And but here comes Red Hat. And Red Hat is, they're like, hey, we're going to go and sell free software. And I'm old enough to remember that this was, we're talking, this is the first bubble. So Red Hat had an IPO and had a very successful IPO. And along comes, well, they're still very successful. This I pulled up yesterday. They're worth $14.5 billion. A company that sells free software. Worth $14.5 billion. So there's a nugget here. There is obviously something of value here. But then you get things like, then along come these guys. I don't know if Mad Dog's here. He's been here before. John Mad Dog Hall, ESR, Eric S. Raymond, and Michael Tiemann. They kind of existed in a counterpoint to Stallman in the fact that they're like, free software is great, helping your neighbors great, but this makes good business sense. Being able to as a business to be able to control the software I use, to be able to look at the software I use, this makes business sense. And so they came up with this idea of open source software. Now, as an exercise once, I mapped, these are the 10 requirements in the open source definition. And in many ways, I think the open source definition is more free than the free software definition. The free software definition is there so you can help your neighbor. And now I'm a freetard. I'm not trying to knock the free software definition. But you've got this no distribution against persons or groups. They specifically say you can't say you can use it unless it's for military use. You know, open source software is for everybody, and you can't limit that. And this was considered a business-friendly license, you know, business-friendly idea, whereas you're not trying to help your neighbor, but it does set the groundwork. Now, let's be perfectly honest. The 4 freedoms map to these 10 requirements. I mean, everything, there's no difference really in the 4 freedoms and the 10 requirements here. So open source is by definition free software. But it did kind of start this sea change for, you know, open source software. And one of the big things is VA Linux, not nearly as successful as Red Hat, but on their opening day, they went up, what, 700% from their asking price. It was insane. Oh, I love those days. I work in network management. There's a protocol called SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol. In 1999, if you could spell SNMP, you can make 100 grand. I mean, it was great. I love those days. But the thing I love about this little snippet is at the bottom, it says, when VA Linux went into the large territory, 9.5 billion or more than half that of Apple. You know, yeah, it's just a little bit, you know, and VA Linux is down. But I'm like, you know, that was a time where Apple was worth, what, $20 billion, and now they're worth nearly $1 trillion. So I think that's kind of funny. And part of Apple's change happened when they started to adopt free software. So let's see if I can make this. Then this happened. It's okay. The bubble was coughing up blood. Let's be perfectly honest. Things were starting. You know, people were realizing that, hey, this company with no customers and no real product isn't really worth $9 billion. So, but this is, I started on OpenNMS on September 10th, 2001. I kid you not. It's like, okay, we're going to start a new business and we're going to build this. We're going to build OpenNMS into a new product, and then the towers fell. And it's like, I don't know if you guys remember, but the wallet shut like nothing for 4 months. Nothing happened. I mean, no, everyone was scared. No one was spending money, etc. But we worked our way out of that. And part of this was this idea that Eric S. Raymond came out with, was this idea called the Cathedral and the Bazaar. I assume everyone's read this. If you haven't, it's freely available down online. You should probably read it. It's a bit dated. I mean, one of his success stories is Netscape, which is a success story, but it's just not the Apple style success story. But his idea was, look, you know, for years we've been focusing on commercial software, make money. It's Cathedral. You have a committee. When I worked at Northern Telecom, you wanted a feature, 2 years, $2 million. That was it. You're Bell South and you want a call forwarding feature or a 3-way calling feature, fine. 2 years, $2 million. And that's how, and then there's committees and you'd write documents and stuff like that. And he basically said, look, we've got this other way, this kind of community way, which kind of harkened back to the TRS-80 and hobbyist days, where we would all share in what we were doing. And he makes a big case for doing that. So open source kind of took off. I mean, you've got Red Hat being very successful, a bunch of other things successful. Then came in what I call open source. We actually own fopensource.org. And it was this idea that, well, here's a bit that's open source, but if you want all these really cool features, well, that's proprietary. I call it open source. One of the synonyms is open core. I mean, it's a business model. It's like, okay, how do we take the VC-backed, we're going to sell software and get them to embrace open source? And so people started saying, well, we're open source. Oh, yeah, well, I want that feature. Oh, that's in our enterprise version, and you have to pay X dollars per device. And that used to bother me because I'd come to shows like this, and we have OpenNMS out, and they go, well, how much is your enterprise version? I'm like, well, we only have the enterprise version, and it's free. You know, one of the things that, there's a guy named Brian Prentice. I'm sure everyone here's heard of Gartner. And Brian Prentice is one of the better analysts they have. He's out of Australia. And he came out with this article, when was it? 2010. And he basically said, look, if you're looking at open core, nothing wrong with that, but you have to treat it like a proprietary software buy. It's because you lose pretty much all of the open source benefits. And a lot of people, so there's nothing wrong. Look, I am all for open source software. If you're producing open source software, I like you. And part of this talk is, you know, back in the day here, I was very fervent about what an open source business meant. And as you'll see, that has changed. But Brian Prentice kind of brought this about. He basically said, look, and so a lot of people who produced open source software, they don't lead with that anymore. They're like, hey, we've got a great product. Part of it's open source, and you can get your feet wet, you can try it out. But hey, if you want these other features, and I'm okay with that. I mean, you're very, very upfront. I don't have to sit here and explain anymore that we don't have a proprietary version. So now Microsoft's kind of gone by the wayside. I mean, it's still there. They'll still be relevant for years to come. But these, to me, are the titans of technology these days. You got Apple and Google. And to me, you really can't compare and contrast, you know, Cathedral, BAZAAR. I mean, Google every day, they're like, let's just throw it up and see if it sticks. Like I was playing with my watch the other day. I got a watch and it like talks to my phone. And it has this thing that says Google Keep. So I can be driving down the road and I can take notes and it'll show up on Google Keep. It's like a piece of, and everyone, when Google Keep came out, it's right after they closed Reader. And it's like, are you going to keep it for like a year? Whereas Apple is like the walled garden, you know, and there's certain things about Apple I admire. I have to actually stop. I used to be the biggest Apple fanboy on the planet. And now I'm not, so I'm like a reformed alcoholic, and I want to preach, you know, I want to tell you about the evils of Apple, and they're not really evil, but what bothers me is that, you know, so I'm trying, and it's a totally different discussion, but I'm trying to live my life. I want to have all the cool stuff that Apple gave me, but I want it to be open source. And so the end slides of this, I'll kind of talk about it. But so now we've got these two guys, you know, so Google produces a tremendous amount of open source code. They do Google Summer of Code. We've been a Google Summer of Code participant for like 5 or 6 times. We haven't done it the last 2 years. Last year they basically said, look, you've done it for like 5 years, we'll give someone else a chance. This year our submission sucked. And I told the team, I'm like, you want to get Google Summer of Code, come up with better submissions. And everyone gets upset. Well, Google didn't accept so-and-so. I'm like, it's their thing, you know. But Google does a lot for open source. And I hope most people know that Darwin, OS 10, is based on BSD. And Apple's fortunes turned around when they started doing stuff on BSD, and now they open source Swift. I mean, I don't know what that'll mean, since Swift will basically only run on Apple Gear, but still, you know, that's kind of the thing. And it's weird how, because when IBM got screwed by Microsoft, IBM's mentality was no one cares about the software, they want to care about the hardware. So no one's going to buy a non-IBM branded PC. And now we've kind of gone full circle. Apple, you know, you want the new operating system, just download it. And it's free. You want Keynote? It's free because it only runs on Apple hardware. So it's kind of weird how we come full circle like that. And Apple's evil, so don't use Apple. I'll show you how you can get all the pretty Apple stuff without Apple. But what I wanted to bring up is here's 3 huge projects. You got Kraken.js, Cassandra, and Hadoop. And we actually leverage a bunch of stuff in Cassandra for OpenNMS. And these are Yahoo, Facebook, PayPal. And, you know, it got me to thinking, I mean, on PayPal, if you go to PayPal, this is a bank. You know, PayPal's an online bank. And yet, if you go, they actually have an open source project page with all the active projects they support. So it started to dawn on me. It's like, look, it used to be a bunch of hobbyists, and we want to do free software, you know, liberté, free for freedom. And now, then open source came along, and it's like, hey, businesses, open source is good for you. You should use open source so you're not locked into vendors. You can customize things. It's great. And now big business is saying, look, my business is moving dollars around, and I need a tool like Kraken to do that. But I don't want to develop it all in-house. So why don't I develop some of it in-house and open source it, and then I get a community built around it, and then I get the benefit, and then everybody else gets the benefit. And we're kind of back to the help your neighbor again, which is kind of freaky when you think about it. And even us, this is, I brought this up. We have this new project out called Newts. It's a time series database that runs on top of Cassandra. And so we're leveraging the work that Facebook did and started Cassandra, and it's Apache licensed. And so we're getting people who are interested in contributing to Newts now. And so we'll benefit, and everyone can use the technology. Have you met our Lord and Savior, Docker? Jeremy was sitting there, you know, he docked for your sins. But here, I mean, so Docker is kind of the buzzwords. I'm actually, Docker's awesome. I mean, you can boot up an instance in like you can SSH into a Docker instance in like 200 milliseconds. I mean, it's really cool stuff. I think the hype machine, because I was talking about, well, what about the security model? And they're like, well, what security model? Because it's like I remember it was like 2 years ago, my first Docker presentation was at the Triangle Linux group. Yeah. Well, discuss. There was some. We were needing a social network, like a forum, and PHBB is just it's PHBB. So we were looking for forums, and I think it is a discuss. There's some new fancy open source forum, and I'm like, okay, we'll download it, we'll use it. It only comes in a Docker image, and exactly right. It's like you wget this thing and you run it as root, and I'm like, I am uncomfortable about doing that. But if you look at Docker, it was started at this .cloud company that no one's ever heard of. Everyone's heard of Docker and no one's heard of .cloud because .cloud was like, so here's an example of a corporation that started something that grew bigger than the corporation that started it. Again, this is exciting to me. And this kind of came, so this is my favorite example because I really dislike Martin Mikos. I was at a show and Martin Mikos he was kind of the king of the open source stuff. And he's sitting there going, well, of course we have an enterprise version because we got to make money. I'm like, but you're not open source. Anyway, I won't go there. So Eucalyptus had this cloud software, and they're like, yay. And NASA tried to use it, and the proprietary wall was so high that they could not get what they needed out of it. So they ended up forking it, and we got OpenStack. And so you've got OpenStack with Rackspace and HP and all these other companies behind it, and they have huge things. So again, here's where the businesses are driving the adoption of open source software. It's basically these companies said we're not going to handle that. We want open source and we really want it. And this is what got me. OSCON. Apparently, I haven't spoken at. I spoke at OSCON for like 5 years in a row, and then I pissed somebody off, and now my papers don't get accepted. But I still go because it's fun. If you are going to be at OSCON this year, we're doing a free concert with MC Frontalot and the Double Clicks. So stay for Thursday because it's going to be awesome. But I went to OSCON last year because it's one of the few times I can see all my buddies. And I was wandering around, and this is what kind of was the genesis of this talk. So here we've got HP. You can see Microsoft in the back. So I'm at an open source conference, and the biggest booth here is Hewlett Packard, not necessarily open source. And there's Microsoft, definitely not associated with open source. PayPal. You can see Google in the background. We had Bluehost, and you had Rackspace. They're here. Big fan of Rackspace. My company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Rackspace. They were one of my early customers. So all of these, whoops, I didn't want to go backwards. Come on. There we, come on. And so it dawned on me, the face of open source right now tends to be corporations. Corporations are driving a lot of this open source adoption, which is just, it's strange to me. So I was like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because I was like, here, because some could say like Google, because they hide everything behind a TCP port, they can take your software and they can modify it. And since they don't distribute it, they don't have to. Chris DeBona is the open source guy at Google, and when they shut down Reader, which I depended on, I love Reader, and I said, why don't you open source Reader? And he basically said that Reader is built on so much of their stack that if he open sourced it, they couldn't open source the Google platform. So he said they open sourced it, it wouldn't run. And so he's screwed because people would be yelling at him, you're not open sourcing all of it, you're being stingy, you're a bad person. So he's like, I'm damned if I don't open source it, and I'm damned if I do. So they just chose the path of saying, well, we're just not going to open source it. And I think other companies like Feedly have stepped into the breach and do a decent job. But I was like, is this a good thing that all these companies are driving open source? And it dawned on me, yes, because the people they hire, the programmers they hire, love open source, and they love the community, and they love when OpenNMS was started by a company called Oculan, and when they decided not to open source it anymore, a lot of the developers were incredibly upset because part of the reason they worked there was the open source environment, this feeling of collaboration. So what does this get me? It gets me amazing free software. There we go. I did this entire presentation on Linux Mint. I'm a big Mint fan. Unfortunately, my new laptop is so new that I have to use Ubuntu 15.04. But the new version of Mint is coming out any day now, and so I'm hoping it'll run. But I use the GIMP to make up my graphics. I use LibreOffice to present the presentation. I use Banshee for organizing my music. I can play videos. It's like there's nothing from the Apple ecosystem that I miss, and this is quality stuff. At my house, so when I went cold turkey on Apple and I was the out beast, I literally got rid of everything that was Apple. And I had an Airport Extreme. So I got rid of my Airport Extreme and I bought an Asus N66U. And there's a guy in Poland named Shibi. And this is Tomato USB by Shibi. And it is a Linux-based open source router software. Now, granted, the learning curve is a little higher. If you want to create a guest network, you don't. You create a new VLAN and give that access to the WAN port, but not in the other port. So it takes you 3 extra clicks to do it. But it's amazing stuff. When I read about all these security holes coming through on routers now, on home routers, I don't have that problem because I'm running Linux, free software on my router. Kodi, are they here? Do you know if Kodi's here? Kodi is awesome. So Kodi used to be called XBMC. Is a home media center. And I actually use a version of it called OpenELEC. It runs on a stick. It runs on a Raspberry Pi. But like, let's say that I have this library of video. Let's just say that it has names like Game of Thrones .se05, S05E09 .proper.mkv. Let's just suppose I have a file like that. And I have a whole bunch of them. Well, yes, sir? I don't know. I don't know, but I hear it's there. And so if you have your directory structure like that, Kodi actually will go out, use TVDB, and they'll download graphics, you'll get thumbnails, you'll get little excerpts, you'll get the true name of the episode. You can do this for video. It hooks up the TV head end. So now I have a PVR. And this is all on my blog, by the way, if you want to know how to build your own. But I bought a little Intel NUC. I got a little TV capture USB stick thingy. And now all my PVR and all my media is being managed by open source. Even I have a weather station. My farm is called Sortova Farm. Get it? Sortova Farm. My first company was called Sortova Consulting Company. Get it? And so if you go to sortova.com, I have a weather station. Again, the proprietary stuff is the software that came with it was crap. But WView is an open source weather program that goes out, talks to my weather station, publishes graphs, keeps an almanac. You can set alarms if there's high or low temperatures. Again, and this came because a new generation of programmers is being involved in open source software, being driven for and paid for by large commercial companies. And again, we've got this guy. Again, my I Heart Snowden shirt. I don't want to get, amongst my friends, there are some people who think he's a traitor, and I just think it's just the exact opposite. There was a long history of people blowing the whistle and being kind of locked up in Guantanamo, basically. But what he brought forth is, hey, we live in a situation where your technology is being co-opted by people you would probably rather not have co-opt your technology. Open source is a way for you to avoid that. I run a custom ROM on my phone. I run Linux on my desktop. I run Kodi for my TV. Everywhere I can, kind of technologically soup to nuts, I'm able to live in an open source world. And I think that's awesome. And as I said, this is one reason why you should care. If you don't care for any other reason, this is one reason why you should. I'm staring at all the little glowing apples here because it's one of the things I've never been able to get my brain around. And it's like, you're not evil people, you're not. But I really want to put out there that there are other options. Anyway. So thanks for letting me run my mouth. I just want to say that, open source is definitely here to stay. It's not dead. But it is changing. But we really shouldn't rail against that. What we should do is let these big companies pay for our software. But just make sure that we're able to own it and get free and to support people who do this. Anyway, if you want to hear me ranting, I'm on G+. I did rejoin the Twitters. I wasn't on the Twitters for a while. Also, so adventuresinoss.com is my open source related blog. I have another geek related blog where I review movies and stuff like that, Tarus.io. And if you're into vintage cocktails, I've got forgottencocktails.com. I got time for questions or comments if anyone has any, but yes, sir. Does he need the microphone, or you just told to get up so he can? Oh, uh, hmm. So the question was basically, or the statement for discussion was basically that commercially backed open source software falls into one of two camps. You've got software companies who generate certain commercial software, but it tends to be obscure or hard to use, and they have some sort of commercial product that makes it easy to use. And then on the other hand, you've got companies, and I want to call them cloud-based companies. They're service-based companies where you're interacting. They kind of keep a tight control over a piece of software. Then they use it internally, and who knows what's going on behind the cloud, because they could be making lots of modifications that they don't share, et cetera, like that. And how does that affect us as consumers of the open source software? Is that close? Um, well, to the first thing, I have to kind of plead guilty. OpenNMS, earlier this year, we split OpenNMS into two versions. One we called Meridian, because Meridians kind of stay the same, and then one called Horizon. One of the issues that we had with OpenNMS was we were doing a release every 18 to 24 months, a major release. So, I mean, we do a point release every 2 or 3 months, but the problem was because our business is almost entirely support and services. I mean, people pay us for support. We didn't want to, someone would commit this new piece of software, and maybe it uses Node.js, or maybe it uses some technology that we're not really familiar with. Well, we don't want to exactly throw it into OpenNMS, because then we got to support it. If it doesn't work, then we've got to support it, and I don't have the people. And OpenNMS is always one. I've always wondered about people who try to, like, to me, LibreOffice. I did an open source business presentation many years ago, and LibreOffice works as a foundation. The idea is, okay, you get people who want to stick their finger in Microsoft's eye. So they say, IBM says, here's $1 million, go make an Office competitor. But to me, I have a hard time finding out the business behind making an application that, like World of Warcraft. When I buy World of Warcraft, I don't expect to need support. You know, it's like, you give me access to the servers, I pay you my $10 a month or whatever, and we're done. You know, you give me patches and bug fixes, and we're done. So OpenNMS and other tools like that, Hadoop, Cassandra, they're hard to set up. And you know, and so there is a business model there in making a commercial version or a proprietary version that's easier to modify. Like Meridian is 100% open source software, but you just got to pay us to access it, just like Red Hat. You know, you pay us a fee, you get the bits, and you can do whatever you want to with the bits, but you get the bits. But what we do in Meridian is it lags Horizon. So since we switched to Horizon, we've done 3, and I'm not here to pimp OpenMS, by the way, I'm just using an example. We've had 3 major releases in 6 months. And we've done amazing stuff. We got a Grafana integration, we've got the Newts integration, we just got this because we can. It doesn't have to necessarily be production quality. We don't put bugs in it on purpose, but we're able to do a lot of release early, release often. Whereas Meridian, we only come out with a release once a year. Just like kind of like Ubuntu does 2 a year. So ours is, we have Meridian 2015, and next year will be Meridian 2016, et cetera. And to me, that's a legitimate business model, because as long as the product you're getting is 100% open source. I mean, we tell our people, you know, the idea is that you buy a license for every server, but our contract limits you you can access from one server to our download server. So you go to our repo, you download the RPMs. At that point in time, if you elect to use it under an open source license, you can stick them on as many computers as you want. I mean, so you're not locked in. But you do have to be careful. What are you buying? Does it give you the freedoms that you're getting? And the idea is with Meridian, if you don't like it, you can always go back to Horizon. I mean, there's nothing, you're just basically paying for our time. You could pick and choose features and do stuff like we do with Horizon. Now, on things like PayPal, there's the power of the fork. I mean, if anything's super good and someone screws it up, does anyone remember, was it Mambo? And it's split into Joomla? Because that was the kind of the thing is Mambo was huge, and was getting a lot of traction. And they tried exactly that. They tried to lock it down and start doing this. Yeah, right. Yeah, with MySQL, who thought Oracle would end up owning MySQL? Yeah, and MySQL, MariaDB. So the thing is, I really wish we had a different word in the English language for free. In French, it's libre and gratis, where gratis is without cost and libre is freedom. Because it's really, in my own thing, it's like, oh, this is free software. Well, tell me how to use it, And not to pick on one particular racial stereotype, but it's like, I am having OpenNMS doubts. I get the doubts question a lot. And it's like, okay, well, we have this community here where you can express your doubts and maybe someone will answer them. But it's like, it's not my business model to sit here and hold your hand. I have classes. We have consulting engagements and you pay us money and we'll come and do that because you're paying for our time. We're giving you millions of dollars worth of software, but not necessarily showing how to use it. What the beauty of Meridian is that a lot of the stuff we do in Meridian, to make it easier to use actually trickles down to Horizon eventually anyway. So overall, it works. But you do have to watch. And the question is, I have, my wife is a CPA. She works for a hospital. And they use a tool that's built on Microsoft Excel. Like the company actually has a database and they export things in a format that Excel uses, and they use a lot of Excel functions. And I think it's weird to have a huge multi-million-dollar software company tied to another company's product. And this is the thing that got me on Apple is like when I'm trying to move away from Apple, I'm like, I want to get my photos out of iPhoto. Every photo management product on the planet, except for iPhoto, to my knowledge, uses a file structure. Like you have a file structure, and there is a JPEG or a PNG or whatever format you have. There's your files. iPhoto puts them into a proprietary database. So I had to Google around until I found someone had written a Python script that yanked all this stuff out and put them in a fold so I could get them out of iPhoto without having to sit there and go click, let's export, click, let's export. Because I had 3,000 to 4,000 photos. And I'm like, look, this is my work product. I created this. You didn't. I remember once I was getting ready to do a presentation, and this was back when I had my Mac, and I'd gotten something. I needed a version of Keynote that I didn't have. And I'm like, I didn't feel like riding to the office and digging the disk out of the closet and installing it. So I paid $25 or what to download it from the store. This is before it was free. And I'm like, I'm basically paying Apple a tax to access content that I created. Now, LibreOffice at the moment isn't, LibreOffice does a lot of open source stuff, does 85 to 90% of what I want it to do. And this is one of the things I'm having trouble with Apple. It's like, I have an Android Wear watch. This is my second. I like Android Wear so much that, and this is a pretty watch. It's prettier than an Apple Watch, isn't it? Pretty watch. I was arguing, Matt Inman, I'm waiting for someone to tell me, what is so awesome about having a watch. Because to me, it just augments my phone. I mean, it's a little bit more, I can tell right now I have three email messages I need to be reading, but I'm busy. And Matt Inman, who does the Oatmeal, came up with this great comic about the 8 things about his Apple Watch. And every one of them, Android Wear does. And my friend Ben, who really likes Apple, was very upset at me because he's like, you expect more from Apple than Apple fanboys. And I'm like, yeah, I want them to fail. I do. To some degree, part of me wants them to fail. But part of me, I'm like, wow me. Give me that Steve Jobs moment. I mean, remember, there's a picture going around the internet. It's like phones before the iPhone. And you had the BlackBerry, and you had the thing that opened like this, and you had the thing that opened like this, and you had the flip, and then phones after the iPhone. And they all look just like that. A big black slab. It didn't matter what's on the back, but on the front, it was a big black slab of glass. And to me, that was amazing. We won't see that in our lifetime. I don't think we'll see another sea change technology-wise. But I'm waiting for that next thing, and I'm starting to see it in open source. I'm starting to Kodi, things like that. Kodi is, OpenELEC makes Kodi incredibly easy to use. So you get this really, I think it runs on like a Slackware. It runs on some kind of really minimal kernel. And basically all it does is exist to support XBMC, or Kodi as they call it now. So you can download it on a stick and you can boot it and it just runs and it updates over the air. You just go click, click, click. And to me, it's as easy to use. And I think we're getting there because, again, it's this kind of, the open source guys work in commercial software. They're not working out of their basement anymore. And they're learning some of these commercial software practices and they're bringing them to the open source world. Did I say, what was, oh, in the basement, yeah. Oh, when I ran my first business, it was just me in my bonus room. And literally, I was on first name basis with the FedEx guy, the UPS guy. My wife would come home and, did you talk to humans? Did you see humans today? Because, between that and IRC, I was on IRC all the time. That was where my peeps were, on IRC. Any other comments or questions? Sorry, yes. Oh. Yeah. Well, like when I left Apple, it's like I just ripped off the Band-Aid. I mean, I'm running Ubuntu. I prefer Linux Mint to. I like Cinnamon better than Unity, but Ubuntu got me off the Mac. I mean, because Shuttleworth has a raging crush for Steve Jobs, and so it's so funny. I'm almost 50, so I don't do like the YouTubes and the Snapgrams and the Veens and the things that all the kids do, and so so when I got my second generation Sputnik, Dell XPS 13, it has a cool boot up video, like in Apple when it goes like welcome and welcome and benvenido and all that, and it comes flying out of space. You know the one I'm talking about? All you guys with Macs know what I'm talking about. The first boot. Ubuntu has one. It's like this little spinny thing, and little music symbols and video comes on. It's really good, like a 40-second little welcome video. And so I recorded it before I skipped it and it goes away forever. I recorded it and I posted it up there. Well, John O'Bacon found it. And so he posted it. And I'm like, the thing's like 3 years old. And I'm like, so I just got this new XPS 13 and it had the little video. So I posted the video. I can't get the comments to stop. It's like people are talking about this because they don't really, this is how tight Ubuntu wants to follow Mac, because it's kind of cool when you open it up. When you get a Dell with Ubuntu preloaded, you get this little extra Easter egg, just like when you get a Mac. And Unity with the launcher is just like the dock, because I kept mine on the side anyway, because with the wide screens, north-south real estate is more valuable to me. So I don't want my dock down here. I want it off to the side. And but then for some reason, what frustrates me is I don't have enough time to try out all the cool open source stuff. I don't. Like Kubuntu Plasma 5 is supposed to be freaking awesome. And it's just like, I don't, I've got other stuff to do, so I can't like base my desktop and play with it. And then you can run it in a VM, but with the 3D graphics and all, it's rare that the performance is the same and stuff like that. But no, I mean, we live in a bountiful world of open source software. Almost anything you think of, you can go get. Now you have to invest the time. And I've learned more about Bluetooth drivers, Synaptics touchpads, TV drivers, you name it, than that. But I learned something. It's no longer a mysterious black box to me. You have to, but let me. Oh, are we done? Oh, I have to repeat the question. Sorry. So the comment, because I want this to be kind of more of a comment thing, is that Apple saves me time. Is what I'm getting here, right? That I don't have to. And Mint is awesome. So the thing that gets me about Apple is great until something breaks, and then you're screwed. Now, granted, it's rare because I'm Snowden, privacy nut, GPG, everything, right? And when I was a Mac user, I, of course, used Mail app because it was integrated to everything. And suddenly it's like, oh, there's a new Mail app. OpenGPG is broken now because Apple won't provide an API because they don't want your data. Now, I mean, it's cruel and unfair. Apple and Google are way more concerned about your privacy than the feds are. But still, I wish that they would just build an API. They should just build an API. And I doubt with 220 billion in the bank, they couldn't find one guy to build the API in the Mail app so I could just plug in and not have to reverse engineer my stuff. But Windows, let me just, one quick statement on drivers is when I got, I bought an M3800 before I sent it back and got the XPS 13. And I wanted to, because it had a much larger hard drive, I wanted to put a Windows partition in just in case something came about that I needed, like WebEx or something that doesn't run that well on Linux. And getting all the damn Dell drivers installed was worse than, so you've got OS 10, Linux Mint, Windows. I mean, you would think that it would be easy to install, but it was not. So, sure. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, there it is. Okay, yeah. So the comment here is basically, so I have a slide talking about how OpenStack was adopted by all these companies, and the point was made that so was systemd, and VI Emacs systemd versus initd. I'm going to stay out of that. I do. I mean, well, okay, I'm not. Because I'm kind of on this side. I think systemd was kind of shoved down our throats a little bit, because the thing I love about my open source life is that I have a bunch of little pieces that each do their job very, very well, and they interact. And so the old init system, we had PAM and we had all this other stuff. We had all these little separate modules that worked really, really well together, and they did their job fine, whereas systemd tries to be this kind of big umbrella thing. And I think that monolithic nature is a little frightening. From an end user standpoint, they alias service to whatever syscontrol or whatever it is. So I just still type service OpenNMS start and it still works. And so I haven't been stung by systemd because I run Debian, I run Red Hat 7, and they're both systemd systems. We had to rewrite a little bit of our startup script to make it systemd nice. But what I love about this, when we start talking about the cloud, people are saying they're putting their, I'm waiting for the big problem with the cloud, like some huge data breach, something, because I've seen how companies store data, and I know that they're trying to be secure, but again, I don't want my crown jewels. I don't want my business being run somewhere that can be yanked out from in front of me. I mean, we used Salesforce for a while, and then Salesforce just like doubled their prices. And it's like, we ended up leaving, because we don't have full-time salespeople. We got a guy who, we have like 3 people who look at it maybe for 20 minutes a day. And, they're designed for people who get in and they log in and they go, and they basically, there was, okay, here's your data. Here's an XML file with your data on. At least they had that. But the thing I like about OpenStack, and again, Rackspace was one of our early customers. We probably wouldn't exist without Rackspace, so I'm putting that bias out there. But we do some stuff with OpenStack and Rackspace. If they ever piss us off, we can go to IBM or HP or Red Hat. I mean, there's other people who provide that, and that's the openness. Again, it's more open protocols versus open and free software, but still, it lets you own what you own. But the story I liked about this was that the proprietary software model wasn't good for NASA, and so they ended up forking it, which is kind of, the gentleman in the back was sitting there saying about, what happens if you have a project that's really controlled. Well, if it's open source, if it's truly open source, people will fork it. And to me, it's a bit of a failure. Someone may fork OpenNMS one of these days. I hope it doesn't happen, because you want anyone who's willing to work on it, you want them to work together. But it's always a final option. So I think that's it. Again, I'm going to be here all week. I've been fighting a cold. I'm surprised I made it through this thing, but I'm willing to talk anybody's ear off for the next 2.5 days. So anyway, that's a big round of applause for the Self guys, because this was awesome. Thanks for coming, and I hope you have a great show.
Citrix Zen Server gives you everything you need to integrate, manage, and automate a virtual data center, all on an enterprise-class, cloud-proven virtual platform, and at a third of the cost of other solutions. But why even bother with virtualizing your server infrastructure in the first place? Well, let's say you have a traditional one server to one application architecture, but you're running out of resources and performance is suffering. Once you order new server hardware, you'll wait for delivery, configure it, install your business application, stage and test the server, and finally, add it to your production farm. If you've been through this process before, you know it can take weeks or even months. You also know it's a manually intensive process that will burden your team every time you outgrow your current setup. With a virtual server solution, you could accomplish all of that in less than half a day. Server virtualization software separates the OS and application from the underlying server hardware. And with multiple virtual machines on a single server, you can use each of them to run different OSs and applications. This makes it possible to move your virtual machines from one piece of hardware to another whenever you want, to maximize utilization, simplify maintenance, or recover from a hardware failure, and without slowing down your applications or users. Clearly, server virtualization provides big benefits, and Citrix Zen Server provides even more. Since it's built on an open platform, Zen Server plays well with your existing hardware, storage systems, and IT management software, as well as with the industry's leading cloud service providers. Best of all, you can get started by downloading a fully functional, production-ready version of Zen Server for free. After a 10-minute installation process, you'll see how easy it is to start virtualizing your workloads and automating your IT management processes. And when you're ready for a richer set of management tools, just upgrade to one of the premium editions of Zen Server. So whether you're interested in virtualizing servers for the first time, expanding your server virtualization footprint, or moving server workloads to the cloud, download and install Zen Server today and see how it can help you simplify your IT environment. Citrix Zen Server. Do more. Don't spend more.
customers rely on your website or application. If it's slow or non-responsive, it infuriates your users and costs you money. Keeping your business-critical systems humming along requires insight into what they're doing. Your system metrics tell stories that can reveal performance bottlenecks, resource limitations, and other problems. But how do you keep an eye on all of your system's performance metrics in real time and record this data for later analysis? Enter Longview, the new way to see what's really going on under the hood. The Longview dashboard lets you visualize the status of all your systems, providing you with a bird's-eye view of your entire fleet. You can sort by CPU, memory, swap, processes load, and network usage. Click a specific system to access its individual dashboard, then click and drag to zoom in on choke points and get more detail. Comprehensive network data, including inbound and outbound traffic, is available on the Network tab, and disk writes and free space on the Disks tab, while the Process Explorer displays usage statistics for individual processes. The System Info tab shows listening services, active connections, and available updates. Adding Longview to a system is easy. Just click the button, copy the one-line installation command, then run the command on your Linux system to complete the process. The agent will begin collecting data and sending it to Longview. Then the graphs start rolling. Use Longview to gain visibility into your servers, so when your website or app heats up, it stays up.